and welcome to our Winter Storm Readiness Community Meeting. My name is Christina Fabuzzi, Public Information Officer for the Montecito Fire Department. Before we get started, I do want to remind everyone that we do have Spanish language interpretation services available thanks to Just Communities, and we have our interpreters at the back of the room if you'd like to utilize their services. We'd also like to welcome and thank our American Sign Language interpreter, Joe Black. If you need to use the restroom tonight, they're located out this door, down the ramp, and to the right. And we'd like to thank Montecito Union School for hosting us once again this year and being such a great community partner. Tonight's meeting is in partnership with the Santa Barbara County Office of Emergency Management, the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Office, Santa Barbara County Flood Control, the National Weather Service, Carpinteria-Summerlin Fire District, and First Aid Supervisor Doss Williams. We appreciate their ongoing commitment to keeping our community informed and prepared for any incident. At the conclusion of our presentation, we will have a question and answer session. We ask that you hold your questions until the end of the presentation. We have several speakers here to provide you with an update for this storm season. Biologist Kevin Cooper, who has been monitoring our watershed since the Thomas Fire, he'll provide an update on our vegetation and soil recovery. He'll also review our watershed status and let us know how much regrowth has occurred and what that means. John Fry from Santa Barbara County Flood Control will cover the status of our flood control system and improvements. Mark Jackson from the National Weather Service will give us a winter weather outlook and word on the storm that's coming up. Montecito Fire Chief Kevin Taylor will present the updated storm impact consideration map and how it will be used making by emergency managers. Craig Bonner from the Sheriff's Office will update us on public safety considerations relative to messaging. Kelly Hubbard, Director of the Santa Barbara County Office of Emergency Management, will update us on how we can keep our properties safe from flooding. First, please join me in welcoming our First District Supervisor, Doss Williams, who has some opening remarks.
Good evening. It's great to see you out there, and I think this esteemed panel will really go over some of the technical reasons why you should have more confidence and understand that we as a community continue on the road to recovery, not only from the natural disasters we have faced, but the pandemic and other challenges. But I want to tell you one of the reasons why we should have strong confidence that is not a technical reason, but is what happens when a community perseveres through hardship. Number one, you all have become more resilient, more aware, more connected with your neighbors and people in the community. And we, as your public servants, we have become more connected to. The level of cooperation, the level of communication that we have now is at an ideal level. And we are really committed to maintain that and to continue that. And I don't see a weak link. I think you really can have a confidence in the people, the men and women that are charged with your safety. And as your elected representative, that gives me great confidence in the future and what we have to face. I should also just give you a brief update that we at the county continue with the infrastructure improvements that you all need. Number one, the Cold Springs Debris Basin expansion, which improves our capacity there. The Randall Road Debris Basin, the first stage of that will be completed around the end of the month. The second stage still awaits litigation. And the clearance of our waterways, and the repair of our bridges and streets and roads. And I want to ask you to have patience for that, because all that repair does require patience. But we are seeing an unparalleled amount of road repair, both here in Montecito and actually throughout the county. If work continues as planned, this will be the first year in my career, and I don't know about it in Walter's, the first year where the pavement index, the quality of our pavement, actually county-wise actually rises instead of holds steady or falls. We're not done yet. We still have operational improvements that we're planning at 4 of the debris basins, and we are committed to the repair and construction of the infrastructure that will help increase your safety. Thank you so much.
Sorry, we are having.
Technical difficulties. Oh, here we are. We'll see if that sticks. Good evening, everybody, and thanks for showing up tonight. I'd like to share with you the results of the vegetation surveys that I've been doing over the past 4 years, and how that result changes and reduces the reflow potential in this area. As we enter our 5th rainy season, hopefully it's a rainy season. We're serious about that. Rain is good if we have just enough for the vegetation to grow. Of course, we don't want too much all at once. But yes, a little closer. Okay, there we go. Is that better? Okay, good. Okay, this picture shows the differences between the watersheds responses between burned areas and unburned areas through time. Now, this is a fire area that shows the burned area up on the higher areas and the unburned areas below. Obviously, there's lots of vegetation on that lower slope in there. The Thomas Fire vegetation is somewhere in between here. We need to know where we are so that we can assess the risk to our watersheds. Now, those two areas that we just saw respond really differently to heavy, high-intensity rainfalls. On the left is a picture of the area that burned in the upper Cold Springs Canyon. This picture was taken after the 1/9 event, and you can see that intense erosion that's being taken place on that slope. But within a couple hundred yards of that slope on the left, I took this picture on the right of an area that was unburned, and you can see that the vegetation and the soil cover there and the healthy soils have prevented most erosion from taking place at all. So that's where we want to be with our vegetation, is that right-hand picture. It usually takes 2 to 7 years for the vegetation around here to recover to that. We're a little slower now because we've been in somewhat of a drought. And most of our vegetation regrowth, as a matter of fact, took place in 2019 when we had good soil conditions. So how far have we come since the fire, and how far do we have to go to get to pre-fire conditions? This picture shows both of an area that was burned and unburned. The left side of the picture here is that picture where I took that picture of that soil sample. So that was an unburned piece of the ridge. On the right-hand side of this picture is an area that burned. So you can see how we're coming along here. It's getting fairly close, right? They're somewhat different, and we're not quite there yet, but we are getting closer. A little bit about how we got this. We started off with satellite imagery because it allows us to take a picture of a very large area and gather lots of information across thousands of acres, which you can't do easily on foot. And we used this information until about 2019. The dark green areas across the map here indicate that 60 to 100% vegetative cover. That's great information, but we need to know where in that 60 to 100% we are. So we looked a little bit closer when we used a drone or UAVs to fly over these watersheds, which are great tools because they allow us to fly over and look straight down on the vegetation and get a much higher resolution view there. Right in the center of the picture, you can barely see it. You see my shadow of me standing there, so that gives you some sense of scale. This shows 90% ground cover. It's kind of hard to see the difference between the bare soil and the vegetation because it's all gray in this picture. So obviously we need to get out on the ground also, which we have been doing. This picture shows a comparison of one of our plots. We have many plots across those upper watersheds. This is the Upper Cold Springs Canyon in February of 2018 and again in July of 2021. So you can see that bare soil right after the 1/9 event and just all the gulling that took place. And on the right-hand side, you can see the vegetation that has grown back. I had to take that picture with the camera above my head, so it's over 6 feet high, and it's quite thick. It's getting difficult to walk through. So there's a great deal of vegetation that has grown, and it's we're a long ways from where we were right after the fire. Here's one of our other plots. It's Upper Cold Springs Canyon again. And again, it's the same comparison from February 2018 and July of 2021. And that is also getting difficult to walk through, and that's a good thing because the vegetation is there helping protect our soil. We want to get a little bit closer. So in this picture on the left, we see the burned area. Chamise, chaparral is very common up there. It grows back, it's stump sprouts, but you can see some of the bare spots underneath that. And so what we're trying to get a handle on now is we saw how far we came with the previous pictures from ground zero from when it burned. Now we need to know how far we have to go to get back to where it was before the fire. So we have some sense of where we are in the spectrum of recovery. In the middle picture is the unburned area, right next to that picture on the right. So the middle picture was unburned. You can see it's a little bit more vegetation there. There's more structure. And so we're not quite there yet. We're getting close, but we're not quite there yet. Again, underneath that middle picture, you'll see to the right some soil cover and some bare soil in there. That's good to know. Not all the places have complete cover underneath them right now. I mean, that are unburned. So we can't expect all of our burned areas to look like thick with ground cover on there. It gives us an indication of where we are along this spectrum here, and we're getting close. I'd say about 80%. If we look down just a little bit closer, we can see some of the older vegetation that's still there. It's died off, but it's still providing structure. We see on the left-hand picture, bush poppy and toyon, but we see the leftover stalks of the mustard plants. In the middle, we see the morning glory vines in the ground. The morning glory vines went crazy in 2019. If you're up there, they grow back very quickly after the fire and cover a lot of the soil. They've died off, but they still are providing excellent cover. There are still some bare spots, as we see in the right-hand side. So we're not all the way there yet, but we've come a long way. So one of the things we looked at were the riparian zones, and these are important for two reasons. One, we want to know if there's a lot of fine sedimentation that has built up in these channels. This is what happened right after the fire. Once the fire burned through, all that sand and gravel came down and filled into the channels, and that's a key component of debris flows. So we want to know if that's been happening over these past 4 years, and it has not. We have not seen that soil come back down and load up these channels again. I also wanted to know what was happening with the large vegetation recovery. Vegetation within the channels helps slow down the water and drop out that sediment, and so it helps reduce that energy. In a debris flow which is extreme, it can tear out all of that vegetation. It becomes part of the problem. We're not there right now, so we're looking for vegetation to grow back and help slow down that energy. This is what it looked like right after it flooded. Of course, it took it right down to the bedrock. And these two pictures show February 2018 and July 2021. The recovery in the riparian zones has been somewhat slow, and that's because we don't have a lot of soil. It's mostly has washed out right down to the bedrock. It's coming back, but not as quickly as we would like it to come back. It's just part of the natural process. It will come back. They usually grow quite quickly, but it has been slowed down. So in summary, we had a drought last winter that slowed our vegetative recovery. We only got 7.5 inches of rain. That's, I think, a quarter of what we normally get up there. Very dry. I think even Phoenix gets about that much. So it really slowed down the vegetation. It was dry this year, but we didn't step back any. We still stepped forward, just a baby step. So the vegetation is still there. It's protected about as well as we were last year. And we saw last year during some heavy storm events that we had good protection. And so we're at least in that point now, if not a little bit better. So even though it's been a drought, we're still moving forward. The soils are continuing to recover slowly, and overall, the average vegetative cover is about 80 to 100%. It's highly variable across that landscape, so there's a range there, and that's about where we were last year, maybe a little bit more. The soils out there are shaly and prone to movement, both before and after fire. These slopes have a tendency to move and be erodable in any case. So there's no such thing as zero risk, even if we've grown back this vegetation here. We need to understand that there is some risk even without any fire. And so there's an increased chance of higher than pre-burn watershed rain response due to the continued reduced vegetative cover, slightly. We're in great shape right now. We're not quite back to where we were. If we have some good rains and the soils stay wet, I expect in the next year or two we'll see those watersheds be back to where they were in 2017 before the fire. Okay, so that's all I have. And next is John Fry from County Flood.
Thank you, Kevin. And good evening, everybody. I am John Fry with the Santa Barbara County Flood Control District. Thank you for coming out this evening. I'm going to go over very briefly the status of, I guess, what you could call the flood control infrastructure in the Montecito community. Handful of slides. We're going to start off with this photo of Randall Road. It's been mentioned earlier. It's a high-profile project for us, and this is an aerial image that was really taken just a couple days ago. It is nearing completion, the authorized work that is, and I consider it even right now fully functional. It will become the biggest debris basin that we will have in this community. We hope to come in late spring next summer, late spring, early summer, to complete the rest of the project, depending on, as was mentioned, the litigation. So we have a number of basins in Montecito. They were mostly built after 1964's Coyote Fire and 1971's Romero Fire. They've been in use for that long, and you can see that they stretch from Santa Monica toward Carpinteria over towards the far west, which I believe is labeled as Cold Springs. Routinely, we keep these things cleaned out, and that work has been taken care of already for this upcoming winter. I want to advertise the remote cameras that we have. We've been increasing our capabilities there. We've found them to be very popular. We can set them at strategic locations, and they are accessible to the public. And we can make that link, which I believe is listed on here. And if not, we'll provide that link to make it easy for you all to tap in and see what we've got. I wanted to close with this slide here that is echoing what Kevin ended his comments with, and that is that the risk, it never goes away. Even when the watershed will be fully recovered, it's not a situation of if it will happen again, it's a situation of when it will happen again. And so that's why we always want to be aware of the risks, always be present, always be informed of our surroundings. And I believe that's the last of my slides. So at this point, I would like to introduce Mark Jackson of the National Weather Service, Oxnard.
And I followed the tallest speaker of the group. Okay. All right, thanks everybody, and thanks for being out here tonight. My name is Mark Jackson. I'm with the National Weather Service down the road in Oxnard. And just first off, I want to say it's been an honor and a privilege to be part of this team that's responded to the Thomas Burn area with the outstanding cooperation and partnership with the county and Montecito Fire, Forest Service. It's really kind of it's a gold standard. We work with a lot of communities, and really what's been going on here to help protect your community has been really second to none. So I'm going to talk a little bit about where we've been in terms of rainfall, and you'll get a picture that kind of matches what, when you hear Kevin Cooper talk about the vegetation recovery, you'll get an idea of why there's been just enough, but still not as much as it could be. And then go a little bit into what we're expecting for the winter. And then we did a last-minute addition with a graphic that will show how much rain we're expecting for this next storm coming up next week. So some of the points for this is we are in a La Nina advisory. So El Nino is the one that gets all the big news. That's the one that typically for us brings a lot of rainfall. You remember 92, 93, 1983, 97, 98. Those were the big El Nino years. And that's typically what happens with El Ninos. We are actually in the opposite, which is a La Nina. And there's about a 90% chance of that continuing into the spring. So this typically means a drier than normal winter season for Southern California, okay? But as I say on that bullet, it only takes one storm to really create a lot of problems. We've been in an extreme to exceptional drought across California. Majority of California is in that extreme to exceptional drought category. We still are in a high fire danger. It's improving with even just a little bit at a time with some of the rains that we've had so far, like the ones we had today, for instance. They always can put a dent and help things green up a little bit, but still we're not out of the woods yet. There's still that possibility that if we have some very dry conditions, very windy and dry conditions, that we could still have some large fires. The Thomas Burn area, technically speaking, is not in our list of burn areas of concern. For Santa Barbara County, that would be the Alisal burn area. It's much newer, but it's not completely off the radar. But there could be some flooding impacts if we get one of these multi-day storms, 2 to 3 day storms that would produce enough rainfall to maybe produce saturation and runoff. Again, it's not completely off our radar. When you think of the terrain that sits above Montecito, any sort of intense heavy rainfall can produce flash flooding, but now it's a question of how much material would be in that flash flooding. It can still be a very dangerous situation, but we're not in a situation of a classic debris flow type of situation. So what's El Nino? It basically means that you have colder than normal water around that equatorial eastern Pacific as it stretches out. And so what happens is much of the moisture is in the western Pacific, and we're missing that moisture tap in the eastern Pacific that can really draw moisture up into Southern California. So again, it's the opposite of an El Nino, and it kind of helps to shape that jet stream. And we've been seeing this quite a bit, where we get this big, large, high pressure ridge that sits up over the eastern Pacific. And every once in a while, we can get storms that come down from, say, the Gulf of Alaska, and they come down far enough west and into the ocean to tap into that moisture. And that's what we're expecting to happen, at least for the early part of next week. So does this mean we're going to have a dry winter? So in this graph, you'll see this is this is a countywide percent of normal water year rainfall. This goes all the way back to 1980 on the far left. Any one of those green bars, this would be precipitation that is quite a bit above normal. Those brown bars are below normal. The blue bars are around normal. I've put X's on the years that were La Ninas. And you see there's a little bit of scatter there. It doesn't always turn out to be a dry winter. And in fact, you can go back and look at 2011. We had 154% of normal across the county for precipitation. So the best way we put it is that it tilts the odds for a dry winter, but it doesn't guarantee a dry winter. Okay? So right now for December, February, through February, precip and temperature outlooks, this comes from our Climate Prediction Center back east. And this is a typical La Nina pattern where it's drier than normal across the southern tier states into the desert southwest, wetter than normal in Pacific Northwest. And so far, this has held true. Pacific Northwest has received quite a bit of rainfall this year. And then we look at the temperature outlook. Typically, we get warmer than normal temperatures across the southern tier states and also cooler than normal up in the Pacific Northwest. So this is a 3-month outlook. It's heavily driven by that La Nina pattern. That's a big factor in determining this outlook. So over the last 12 months, in terms of temperature and precipitation, on the left is precipitation, and this is percent of normal. So wherever that dark red area that you see through Ventura County, that's a record driest. All right, so then you get that next shade of brown, that's a much below normal, bottom 10% when you consider all of the other seasons. So much of California is below normal, and then you look at temperature on the right, and it's also been warmer than normal. So that kind of exacerbates the situation where you don't have precipitation, plus now you've made it warmer than normal, you've increased that evaporation, the soils become very dry. So this is what we've been looking at over the last 12 months. So when you look at the water year for the South Coast District, and that goes all the way from Santa Barbara County down, all the way down to San Diego County, and on the left you see these different bars that show the water year precipitation, which that goes from October to September, and that's when we get our rainfalls in the winter primarily. And you see on the left as it rises up, that black bar is average, okay? And then down there on the bottom, way on the bottom, October 2020 to September 2021, that's that blue line. So that's where we sit in terms of comparing to all the other years, going all the way back. And again, it hasn't been the driest, but it's been very dry. So our current drought in the west. So this is the drought monitor. That's the website that you see on the lower right there if you want to get an update. And this is a collaborative product that National Weather Service is part of. Universities are all a part of as well. State water districts are a part of it as well. They all go in, and this comes out every 2 weeks. So you can see all of that dark red is considered exceptional drought. And that is the worst category of drought. So much of California is in that extreme to exceptional drought. So just to explain a little bit, typically what we've done whenever we have the possibility of heavy rain, one of the first things we'll do is a flash flood watch. Okay, so you'll hear that maybe a couple of days before the event comes. And then as the event happens, then we issue flash flood warnings. All right, so this is a little bit different now than what we've started. This is an attempt across the National Weather Service to simplify things. So now what we will issue is a flood watch. So whenever we see that there's the possibility of heavy rainfall that could produce flooding, we'll issue a flood watch. And that will typically be issued about a day before we get the event. So for instance, for this next storm that's coming up next Monday and Tuesday, we might issue a flood watch on Sunday. So it gets you kind of in that mindset of we're coming up to this event where we could have some flooding. And then when we see heavy rain that could produce flooding, whether it's coming down very rapidly at a slope or whether it's ponding, and we might have in extreme cases even some of the main stem rivers that could flood, then we'll issue that flood warning. So the difference now is that for if we have flash flooding outside of a burn area, we will only issue a flood warning. But when you talk about a burn area, and this would be, for instance, for the Alisal, probably most likely not for the Thomas, that's when we would issue a flash flood warning for burn areas. Okay, so as you'll see in a slide here, we don't anticipate at all having to do this for this area, but possibly then for farther up the road and for the Alisal. So here is what we're expecting for our next storm, and it'll be a pretty good soaker. It'll be should be heavier than what we experienced back in October. That was kind of a weird storm. We typically don't get those kind of storms in October, but this is what we're expecting for the totals from about Monday. Roughly the heaviest part will be Monday through Tuesday morning. And you can see across Santa Barbara County anywhere from 2 to 3 inches along the coast as you get up into the mountains and the foothills, some higher amounts, maybe up to 5 inches. And we do have areas within the Santa Barbara South Coast that typically do very well with these situations up in the foothills and should get quite a bit of precip. What we don't know right now is what the rainfall rates will be quite yet. So we're still a little bit too early. As we get into Saturday and Sunday, we'll start to get a little clearer picture on how intense this rain might be. So I think, as Kevin said earlier, that there is such a thing as a good rain, of course, and even this, if it doesn't come down too heavily all at once, could be a very good rain that could really help to really soak into the ground, help green up that vegetation, and hopefully kind of get us out of high fire season. And then in the long run, it does make a difference in terms of trying to get that grow back within the Thomas burn area and get us up to a pre-fire condition. So just kind of summarizing what we're looking at for the Thomas area. So It's no longer in our burn areas of concern. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to ignore it or it's not off the radar. It's anything along the front country. Of course, anytime you have heavy rain with the slopes and the canyons, we do have to be concerned with flooding and flash flooding. We won't use any debris flow reference whenever we do issue a warning, okay? But there are the normal protective actions that people should take in terms of getting to higher ground, staying away from streams and creeks. But if we did have a multi-day exceptional rain event where we have accumulations, say, of about 10 inches in a 3 to 5 day period, what happens then is that the ground becomes saturated. And once the ground becomes saturated, now a lot of the rain then runs off. And now you've increased your probability of flooding once that saturation occurs. So we're not expecting that coming up here next week. But if down the line sometime this winter we're looking at one of these systems that just kind of stalls out and produces 3 to 5 days of heavy rain, then it would create more concern, of course. And then our winter weather outlook, just to summarize again, we're expecting a dry winter. I know it's going to be hard to believe given what we might get, or likely get on Monday and Tuesday, but that's what we're expecting at this point. It increased the odds. The flood risk is very storm dependent, of course. And the normal flash flood or the flood guidance, the flood warning guidance will not be used in this case, with the exception if we do happen to get any large burn areas. But again, on the right, there's many ways that you can stay informed. Again, through our website, we are on social media through Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. We don't technically have an app, but if you have like the Weather Channel app, weather.com, that works well, or the media outlet. ReadySBC.org, of course, and those alerts. NOAA Weather Radio, they make great Christmas gifts if you would like. Shameless plug for that. And you can get your alerts on that as well. So with that, I'm now going to introduce Montecito Fire Chief Kevin Taylor.
Good evening, and thanks again, everybody, for coming. As you know, at the Fire District, our goal is to keep the community safe, and all the presenters here tonight take that responsibility very, very seriously, and it's our top priority. At our previous community meetings, including this meeting last year, which was only on Zoom, we committed to you that we would keep you informed on our decision-making and what we're doing, that we would issue evacuation orders only when absolutely necessary, and that you would be alerted as early as possible. Tonight we follow through on that promise by reviewing the updated storm impact consideration map and discussing our decision-making processes for this storm season. As you recall, there were no evacuation orders issued in our community last year for storms. The storm impact consideration map that's up tonight was produced by our consultant, Atkins Engineering. This is the same firm that has produced all of our debris flow risk maps. They utilize inputs from Kevin Cooper and John Fry that they covered earlier, as well as the most recent peer-reviewed debris flow science and topographical data to model debris flow risk during events that Mark Jackson just described. So saturation rainfall events of 8 to 10 inches over a couple of days with high intensity, short duration rainfall embedded. All this work comes together in this final product that you see on the screen, the storm impact consideration map. As you can see on the slide, the red areas are substantially smaller this year than last year. There are 355 parcels included in the communities of Montecito, Summerland, and Carpinteria. Last year there were 445, and in 2019 there were 517. You'll recall that after the debris flow in 2018, the first map had 1,508 parcels on it. The reason why there are fewer is because the watershed continues to recover and these storm systems have been improved and enhanced. You can determine on this interactive map if your property is in one of these areas by entering your address, and the map will take you there automatically. If your parcel is outlined in red, that means that we want you to have a plan to evacuate if there's a storm. Our takeaway from this latest analysis is that we are still at risk for debris flow and will be for the next couple of years. Our community experienced a significant debris flow in 1969, 5 years following the 1964 Coyote Fire. You'll recall that the Thomas Fire was in December of 2017, so we remain in that transition period. We're past the highest risk, but not quite at no risk due to our community's very long history of flooding. Because much of the watershed has recovered, there's less material available in the canyons, so we're at a little less risk. Additionally, mitigation measures to protect the community have been substantially enhanced with the development of the Randall Road debris basin, improvements to the previously existing basins, including Cold Spring, the addition of ring nets, and the constant work of the flood control district to keep our waterways clear. This helps reduce our risk. Now let's talk a little bit about how we use the map. We will use this map this year the same way that we utilized it last year. Properties outlined in red will be asked to take a protective action if we have a saturation rainfall event with a high-intensity, short-duration cell embedded. Again, that's somewhere between 8 and 10 inches over 2 to 3 days, and then an inch to an inch and a half per hour embedded. Remember, when we do an evacuation, our goal, our number one priority, is to help keep our community safe. If it's necessary to issue an evacuation order this year, we will do everything in our power to give you plenty of advance notice that it's coming. Our goal is to alert you at least 48 hours in advance. Please know that we recognize what an inconvenience any protective action order is to you and your family, and that is taken into consideration in our storm impact team meetings. If you have any questions about the map, after you've had an opportunity to review it, how it impacts your property, the methodology utilized to develop it, or any other questions about Atkins engineering work, please contact me personally at the Montecito Fire Department. Our number one responsibility is to protect this community, and we take it very seriously, as do all of our partners that are sitting here with me today. Thanks very much for attending, and it's my pleasure to introduce Chief Deputy Craig Bonner of the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Office.
So good evening, and thank you everyone for being here today, for taking an active role in the safety of your family and your community. It's really important, and really appreciate that you're here, whether physically or watching the live stream. So I'm going to quickly touch upon evacuations and public notifications and what you can do as it relates to those. Okay, so and what you can do with your family as it relates to those evacuations and or those warnings to better prepare yourselves and to be safe. Slide. Okay, so this slide's actually a little bit outdated. The next slide is our current slide that has the actual terminology that we're using. However, I like this slide because it's very simple. Ready, set, go. And the first thing is to recognize that the time to prepare for an evacuation is not when an order occurs or when an evacuation warning occurs. The time to prepare is now. You know, you want to start getting ready, making those plans, making those preparedness activities. Those should be occurring right now. And then you're going to want to make sure that you're paying attention to what's going on, whether that's information that's being sent out by the County Office of Emergency Management, other government entities, or the news media. If you start hearing about a storm coming in, that's your cue to start paying attention, finding out what's going on, and starting to make those initial plans in terms of putting together your go bag, getting those things together that you want to take with you and having them ready so that you don't have to do that once the evacuation warning or order is made. Get set. That's when the evacuation warning goes out. And that's us, again, 24 to 48 hours ahead of time, trying to let you know now's the time to get all those things ready and truly be ready to go. That's the time when you want to start loading these things into your car. Make sure that you got a full tank of gas, making plans with friends and family. One of the key things is that if you have special needs or if you don't feel comfortable, don't wait for the evacuation order. You want to get out of there when the evacuation warning comes out. And the example that I like to give of that is my own in-laws. So when the Thomas Fire was heading west, they ended up in an evacuation warning area. They had medical issues, mobility issues. They didn't feel comfortable. We brought them out until they were no longer in, but we did not wait until the evacuation order came. We got them out of there ahead of time so that we didn't have to worry about it, because again, that evacuation order can come in the middle of the night, and that's not the time to try to figure out how to get out of there. And then of course we have go, ready, set, go. Go is when the evacuation order goes out. That is the time to head out. So this slide has the current verbiage that we're using: an evacuation order, evacuation warning, and shelter in place. So we're going to start with evacuation order. And again, as I described a minute ago, this is when your public safety team has engaged in that storm risk decision activity, and we've decided that there is a significant chance that we're going to need to go into an evacuation order in the near future. And we're trying to give you that heads up that it's time to get ready. And again, this is the time to complete your final preparations, keep your ear to that rail, and be ready to leave at a moment's notice. And again, leave early if you don't feel comfortable. The evacuation warning is also a good time to start thinking about if you have transportation needs or you have large animal needs, right? This is the time when you want to reach out to friends and family. If you have those transportation assistance needs, it's also a good time to reach out to Santa Barbara County Animal Services if you have needs relate to large animals and or the need for transportation assistance. And I think I'm going to go into a little bit more detail on the next slide as it relates to the 211 system. So evacuation order, that means that there is an immediate or an impending life-threatening hazard, and you should leave the area immediately. That is a legal order made by the sheriff closing an area to the public. And contemporaneous with that, an evacuation shelter will be established and announced. So in a similar vein but slightly different is shelter in place. So evacuation orders, we typically have sufficient forewarning that we can get you out of there before the immediate danger is there. And that's typically what we're going to do with these storms. However, there are going to be circumstances where it was unforeseen, right? That there was not enough information to indicate that we should put something into, or a community into, an evacuation order, but all of a sudden an immediate threat comes up. You know, whether that be a thunderstorm that came in and is now dumping a lot of rain and causing a flash flood concern. We also use them when we have armed suspects in neighborhoods where we put out a shelter in place. And what we're asking for on that is to not get out into the roads where you're going to be at a higher risk. We want you to shelter in place. We want you to pay attention to what the nature of that threat is, i.e., is it a flash flood or is it an armed subject, and to move away from that threat. So in the case of a flash flood, move to higher ground, go up to the second story, go to the center of your home. In the case of an armed subject, it would be, again, lock your house down and get to the center of your home away from windows and doors, and then be prepared to self-sustain once that occurs. So those are the three. We have an evacuation warning, an evacuation order, and shelter in place. All right, with regard to evacuation assistance, again, if you or members of your family have additional concerns, mobility concerns, medical needs, transportation challenges, there are some resources up here, whether it's 211 for information, Easy Lift of Santa Barbara is another entity that can help with transportation needs, and animal evacuations. Again, it's kind of repetitive, but it bears worth repeating that start early, prepare early, don't wait until the evacuation order to start working on these things. Make those prior arrangements with your family and friends ahead of time. The one thing that I will ask is that we reserve the use of the 911 system for emergencies. The 211 system is a much better alternative for most things. We want to make sure that we are using the 911 system for people who are in crisis, who have that immediate need and are trying to connect public safety services with those community members that are in crisis. And if we load up with informational calls, it can overload the capacity of the community or the emergency communication center. So again, we'll use 211, we'll use information like the Easy Lift, etc. Use those systems instead of the 911 system to obtain information. So again, thank you again for being here. I'm going to turn this over to Kelly Hubbard from Santa Barbara County Office of Emergency Management.
Good evening. There we go. I'm going to share a little bit of information. It's double wording here. Information about how you're going to get notified and receive information about the incident, and then how after that initial alert and warning type information, how you'll continue to get information throughout an incident. So for evacuation notification and incident updates, you want to make sure you're registered with readysbc.org. There's a banner across the top of our website that will point you to where to do that registration. I know many of our community members have already registered here. I'd like to encourage you to go back to that website, log in, and check your contact information to make sure it's current. You might have changed email addresses. Maybe you were getting too much spam. You open a new email address. Make sure you update that information. Make sure your phone number is in there. If you have a new cell phone, a new home phone number, make sure all of that information is current in the system. Okay. Another way you can register is through Nixle. You can text your zip code to the number up here on the screen. If you do that, please know I still encourage you to go back to the website and provide more information. When you go to the website, we get your full address and we can give you very targeted messaging for your address. If you register by zip code, it's a little bit harder to get targeted information to you based on exactly where you might be in that at that time. Wireless emergency alerts that will activate your cell phone with a short message. This does not require you to be signed up. That comes out through our cell towers. We have the emergency alert system. National Weather Service uses this, as well as our local radio and television channels. And then, if necessary and safe to do so, our safety officials will also go through the community and provide door-to-door notifications or use loudspeakers to additionally share this information about any type of protective action. As the incident continues, if there is a significant event, you can get information many ways. We share as much information as we can with our media partners. Our own CSBTV cable station. Montecito Fire District has their own radio station, AM 1610. 211. When there's an incident, we would activate our EOC, our Emergency Operations Call Center, and we'll get that information, that phone number out to you at that time. Again, reiterating, emergency calls only to 911, not informational calls. We will continue to update information on readysbc.org. What we do during an incident, any type of emergency, is we will put up a big red banner for that incident information right at the top of the screen. You can click on that and it'll take you to a page with more information. Lots of different social media accounts from the various response partners and agencies. I have those listed here on the screen. If any of you need additional assistance finding those later, we can always help you with that. I'd like to talk a little bit about preparedness. I know you guys get this message often, and we have Mirage here in the community that helps to provide preparedness information to the community. Reiterate, sign up for emergency alerts on Ready SBC. Monitoring weather reports. I have 2 places here, again, pointing out where you can get weather information from. Be prepared to leave and relocate early if necessary. Important, mentioned earlier, all of the road updates. So you might know your normal roads, your access roads, how you get to and from home to work. Make sure you're monitoring all of the different changes with all of the construction that is occurring in the community, and that you know which routes are best to take at different times as that continued construction continues in your community. Never drive or walk into floodwaters or go around barricades. And then prior to any storm and coming into this winter season, please consider various protective measures for your property. The County Public Works website has lists of sandbag locations. Prepare your home and property for any type of potential flooding. There's a lot of great information, both at the County Flood Control website as well as at readysbc.org. And then you go /storm-ready. Flood insurance, again, make sure that you are considering whether or not you have flood insurance for your property, both not only for debris flow post-fire. This is a community, all of the front country here in Santa Barbara County is a flood community, and so just making sure that you have those proper insurance protections. Have an emergency plan and a disaster kit ready to go. So have that disaster kit at home with your essential supplies for staying at home and sheltering in place, or any type of emergency supplies you might need at home. But also be ready to go and have supplies ready to take with you if you need to leave for any reason. And then number 10, again, is a repetition a little bit here, but again, Public Works storm preparedness materials. Their website has excellent resources on how to do additional protections of your home. And I think Christina's coming back up. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly, and thanks to all of our speakers tonight. We'll now open it up to your questions, and if you have a question, we ask that you please come up to one of these microphones at the front of the room so that the people following along at home can hear your question. All right, would you just step over to that microphone so we can hear you?
I want to thank everybody for taking the time tonight to come out and meet with us and explain everything. I personally appreciate it very much. I have a question, John, for you. I know that when the ring nets were applied a few years ago, I don't know how many have been done versus what were proposed. At one point, I know it was going to double our capacity for holding debris back in our front range. But I also know that there was a temporary approval of those ring nets, and that after, I think, a 5-year period, it was required that they be removed. And so I wonder if there's been any movement in that, and if we're going to be able to maintain those ring nets for additional protection even as we go forward beyond the 5-year period. And here's your microphone back.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, first off, I'll say that you may know that the ring nets are not a county flood control facility. So all I really know is probably what you know by having read in the paper. That is my understanding, that the regulatory permits were for a period of about 5 years or so. There may be others in this audience that know much more about the ring nets than I do. So I really can't speak with any great level of knowledge or detail about the ring nets.
Yeah. I can
Usually
help you
the
with
federal
that.
agencies will ask the county for our opinion, and our opinion would be that we should allow them to remain in place longer.
So the comment was that Fish and Game had a lot to do with the life cycle of the ringnets. I believe it was, yes.
I can help you with that ringnet question.
All right, thank you. And your question?
Yeah, I went to a ringnet meeting this morning with Pat McElroy, and the information was there are 5 of the ringnets installed. They originally talked about 16 ringnets. The contract with the landowners where the ringnets are installed is 15 years, and as you've said, the county approval is for 5 years. But the good news is that originally they had to take them down. $6 million was raised in the by private citizens of Montecito to do that job, and the question was asked, which is more effective, the ringnets or the Randall Road debris basin? And the answer was they're both important to us, whatever that means. Now, I have a question for Doss, if that's
Go ahead,
okay.
Bob.
Again, like Jim Witherall, this is great of you guys to come out here on these kinds of nights, and the community really appreciates it. But you talked about the county being better prepared now, and I agree with you. It is better prepared, particularly on the threat of flood, and that's what we've dealt with tonight. But in my mind, the larger threat is the threat of an earthquake here in Montecito, where you get gas explosions, multiple fires. The 101 is shut down, and 192 is shut down, and you have no cell phone communication, no TV, limited radio, and everybody's sitting in their house saying, what the heck do I do? Because if I try to evacuate, if 192 and the 101 are down, I'm in trouble. So are we prepared, and is there a county program to talk about earthquake protection and where the faults are and how vulnerable are we to it? And we had the one earthquake here in Santa Barbara in 1925, and what did we learn from that? And is Montecito more vulnerable than Santa Barbara, or vice versa, et cetera?
No, I really appreciate that question, because it is human nature to fight the last war and not always to plan adequately and prepare for the next one. The county does have an education and a plan on earthquake, among other natural disasters, so I'll have Kelly go over that. But I think this is an important note of why we need to be each prepared ourselves. The most basic and important reaction to an earthquake, and we had a little bit one last night, is turning off your gas, which not everybody knows how to do, and having adequate store of water and food in your home. For the county's plans, I'll have Kelly detail those.
Good evening, Kelly Hubbard, Director, Office of Emergency Management. I have a little text into staff in the back to confirm a website for everyone, but for emergency planning for earthquakes, it's what we consider our all-hazard planning. So when emergency managers and all of our safety officials, earthquakes is kind of our disaster of everything that could occur. And so really all of our planning contributes to any type of response that we might need in an earthquake. And so when we talk about the readiness of our response agencies for an earthquake, I think we're very much there because we continue to practice for all types of emergencies. In terms of community members, important things with earthquakes would be your emergency kit at home, having the proper tool to turn off your water and gas if needed. It's not always needed. Having the water and food as mentioned, having a communications plan. often in an earthquake or any type of disaster, when you can't call somebody, it's a local network congestion concept. So for my family, I have family in Southern California and I have family in Northern California. If there's an incident in Southern California, they call the Northern California family because we're more likely to get phone calls out to that family easier than trying to call locally, and then we can get updates for each other. So small things like that to be prepared as a community member can really help. Additionally, earthquakes are not necessarily an evacuation-based emergency. Evacuation would be very much based on your own property and whether or not your property has damages, in which case then you might want to or need to go to a shelter. Wanted to give you a little bit of an update. We are in the middle of, and staff are sending it to me, I'll see if it loads here. We are in the middle of updating our multi-jurisdictional county hazard mitigation plan. That is a plan that looks at all of the risks that might be associated with our county and what those potential impacts. So that includes earthquakes, floods, tsunamis, any type of natural disaster. And we are in an open public comment period. That draft plan and content is, I don't think the plan's up yet, but content is up on our website at readysbc.org. And then I can't see the link, sorry, crew. Thank you. But if you go to readysbc.org, you'll be able to see that content. It talks about where do we have fault zones, where do we have earthquake faults. It has information about various mitigation, how we might continue to improve our community infrastructure to reduce hazards such as loss of communications or infrastructure damage. So I'd encourage all of you to look at that if you have any interest in knowing a little bit more about the hazards for this community, as well as providing input into how we continue to improve the protection of our infrastructure for those types of hazards. Hopefully that helps.
Can I just add that for the 1-9 debris flow, we had as close to a scenario as we get. We did lose cell, electricity, water, gas, and so some of that was bringing information into the communities, water drop-offs, having enough water supply at home, battery-powered radios to continue to get information if information can, get out. And so I just want to remind everyone, we kind of went through that, and so think back if you were here for that, about what we did and what you did. Roads were impassable, power lines were down. It was pretty close to a scenario as we get.
Thank you. Any more questions from the audience?
I'd like to comment about the question on communications. The Montecito Emergency Response and Recovery Action Group is a volunteer organization here in Montecito, established in the mid-'80s by Montecito Fire Department and now supports the fire department, also the border district and sanitary district. One of the resources we have is an UHF two-way emergency radio system. There are about 35 of these radios that are held by citizens and organizations, institutions in our community. The radios are tested monthly, and the carriers of these radios are trained in their use. There are more of these radios that are available and can be assigned to folks who live or work here in Montecito. So this system is really a last-ditch means of communications. It is independent of cell towers and within the capacity of the batteries in the radio systems. And these batteries, of course, can be charged with home.
Mr. Boyd, I want to be respectful of people's evenings. I'm sure many people want to get home, and we do have Mirage volunteers here. We're so grateful you're here. So if you do have questions about Mirage, we'd love to go in depth with you. We have our volunteers here. Do you have a question that we can answer for you specific?
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we do have our Mirage volunteers here, and we encourage you to talk with them about getting involved with Mirage and learning more about the radio system that Dave told us about. Thank you. Are there any other questions this evening? And if you don't want to come up to the mic, I completely understand. We will all be available here afterward to answer your questions one-on-one. We want to thank you all for being here this evening, and if you want to take a look at the interactive map, we do have our staff from OEM here to show you how that works and go right to your address to see whether you're in that risk zone. Thank you all for being here tonight. We really appreciate your attention and taking this time out of your evening. Have a good night.